90.3.
867 1190.
Near FM.
You're very welcome back to the second part of the Monday edition of Northside. Today with me, Donie Tarrant. What a fabulous programme and project that Challenger programme is. Well done to everybody involved. Great to see it. Now, something which I have never done before is actually spoken to an ombudsman. Well, I'm going to put that right this minute because I am now speaking with Ger Deering. Ger, good morning and welcome to the programme.
Good morning, Donie, and thanks very much for the opportunity.
It is a pleasure because it's a fascinating role you have, but I suppose it's the obvious question, what is the role of the Ombudsman?
Well, the role of the Ombudsman, Donie, is to resolve complaints against public service providers. Now, that's a whole range of public service providers. As you know, every day we interact with the public service, whether that's our local county council, whether it's the health service, or a whole range of areas. And in fact, it includes even nursing homes, because many people who are in nursing homes are actually funded from the public purse. So basically, if you think of any service really that is funded from the public purse, and if somebody has a difficulty with that organisation, we ask them in the first instance to go and make a complaint to the organisation concerned. And if they're not happy with the response that they get, or indeed if they don't get a response, then they can come to us. And we'll firstly try to resolve the complaint informally and very quickly if we can. And if that's not possible, we go to a full investigation and we look at the file, we look at both sides and the arguments, and we're independent. And then we come to a view as to what should resolve or how this complaint could actually be resolved. And it can be quite significant, the outcome for some people.
Now, I suppose the other side of it then is, and I'm glad you mentioned it there, because I think it's important that there may be sort of a mindset with some organisations of just not responding to people who have an issue or a problem, where they're just totally ignored. They get no response whatsoever. Now, I'm old enough to remember when we didn't have the Ombudsman in place. Is that sort of... I'm picking my words here carefully, Ger, but I still have to... It's the only one that comes to mind. That mindset of ignoring people with complaints, does that go back to them times when there wasn't an ombudsman? And I suppose, for want of a better way of putting it, nobody seemed to be answerable to anybody except your own boss, immediate boss over your head.
It's a very interesting point you make, and it's true, Donie, that communication is at the heart of almost every complaint that we deal with, or indeed maybe lack of communication. And I would like to think, and you're mentioning about the office and when we were established, we're 40 years on the go last year, and there is no doubt, and like yourself, I'm old enough to remember when there wasn't an ombudsman office either. So there's no doubt that the intervention and the work of the ombudsman has done a huge job in improving public services generally, and that's an important point, because we don't just deal with the individual complaint. So in some cases we would discover that there's actually some sort of a systemic issue. So I can undertake, as well as dealing with individual complaints, I can undertake what we call systemic or own initiative investigations. And just one that I'd give you as an example that we did recently was an investigation into the treatment abroad schemes that are run by the HSE. Now, these are very good schemes where somebody can actually access treatment abroad if that treatment isn't available here, or if they would have to wait too long to get treatment in this jurisdiction. So they go, they have their hip replaced, they have the cataract operation, or whatever that treatment that they actually need is, and then they're entitled to claim back the cost of that when they arrive back. But we actually found in that instance, and it's on the lines of what you're talking about, we found when we started to receive complaints about this and investigated it, that there was an over-bureaucratic approach to dealing with. For example, if somebody had, they must have a referral letter, as you can imagine, from a doctor to access the service. Yes, the regulation says that it must be signed by the doctor, but sometimes doctors are very busy and they might ask a colleague or a receptionist or somebody to sign on their behalf. In these instances, that wasn't being accepted, that was a referral from the doctor, even after a doctor had written a letter later to say that it was. Other problems we were finding was that proof of travel and things like that were being asked for. Now, this meant that people were very significantly out of pocket. For example, I remember one lady who had her hip replaced and she had to pay €11,000 and then couldn't get, and she had borrowed it from her sister and couldn't get this money back. I'm happy to say that after our intervention, the chief executive of the HSE accepted the recommendations in our report, and now not alone did those people who were out of pocket at the time get their money back, but in fact the scheme has run much better and those issues that were causing problems have been dealt with. So that's a long answer to your question. Yes, I think things are better because the Ombudsman is in place, and it is important that public bodies are accountable to some other authority or some other office. But I'd also say that we resolve a huge amount of complaints informally, because very often there's a mistake or lack of communication, and we try to get those resolved as quickly, and we do actually resolve about 80% of complaints in 3 months.
Ger, it's not a long-winded answer at all. It's actually a very, very good one. And my guest, of course, is Ombudsman Ger Deering, who is the Ombudsman for basically anything which you will, by way of public service, that you come in contact with. And based on that answer, Ger, do you think that, and it's something that is I think it's becoming a bugbearer actually. You know, we're going slightly outside your remit here, but you'll get where I'm going with this. It's become a bugbearer of most of the public, is the fact that, you know, when government departments and even sectors within government departments are spending taxpayers' money, and it's something we alluded to in our last chat, that there seems to be, in some instances, they play fast and loose with that money. But if the Ombudsman comes along, as in the case that you highlighted there, and all of a sudden they get hit in the pocket, and it's highlighted, I think that's the biggest thing with your job. The likes of that instance with that lady would have been €11,000 out of pocket, but for your intervention. If that's highlighted and a little bit more finger pointing done, a lot of things might tighten up and improve around the country.
Well, yes, there's no doubt that improvements come about, and in fact, we publish an annual report. We'll be publishing it in May of this year, and in that we set out examples of issues we have dealt with. And it's also not just about money. I mean, one that comes to mind from last year was a lady had been in St. Vincent's Hospital, and I wasn't aware, but if you've had a transplant, you're at a higher risk actually of developing cancer, unfortunately. So for that reason, this lady was referred to an oncologist or another consultant within the hospital. So basically what happened was one consultant wrote to the other to set up the appointment, and when she arrived back sometime later, she found that the consultant found the appointment hadn't been made. Now, when we intervened, we discovered that really what was happening was that the postal system, the system within the hospital was so outdated. I mean, the idea that somebody in an organisation in one part of it would write a physical letter, a hard copy letter to the other. So we said to the hospital, this has to be changed. And I mean, that lady brought that complaint to us, not for her own sake, but actually to ensure that something wouldn't happen, because when she did eventually get the appointment, unfortunately, she did actually have cancer. So you can see how serious some of these situations are. So the hospital's suggested improvement in that case was they were going to improve the printing and distribution system, and we said, no, that's not good enough. It's not going to achieve what you need. So they've now implemented an electronic system, which I believe is checked every day, where those appointments are sent electronically and immediately from one area to the other. So coming back to your point, you can see that because of the intervention we make, and it's not just, as I mentioned earlier, for the complainant concerned, if we believe the system can be improved for all of those concerned. And that's why, maybe coming back to when you opened up the interview, you talked about people making complaints. You know, it's so important that people make a complaint. We're not great in Ireland at making complaints, and it shouldn't be seen as a negative thing, because it's the only way that all of us will learn is when we find out that something we're doing isn't ideal or isn't working well, or that there's a problem. It is important that the public will complain, and as I mentioned, it's important that they complain first to the body concerned and then come to us if they don't get satisfaction.
Yeah, and of course the whole point of that, Ger, is really it's your job to have oversight and fix and deal with complaints. That is it in a nutshell. Now, forgive me for simplifying it and sounding very stupid, But how can you fix something that isn't working properly if you don't know about it? And you're not going to know about it unless people make the complaint.
That's exactly the case. And that's why people are doing, not just themselves, but others a service. And coming back to the case I mentioned, we have several of those cases where people make a complaint, not because they're going to get any gain themselves, but because they feel what happened to them shouldn't happen to others. Now, there are cases, by the way, that it can bring about a significant improvement for somebody themselves. I mean, we deal with the Department of Social Protection. As you can imagine, we get about some of the highest number of complaints, about 600 from each year from there. But I have to put it in context. They do something like 82 million transactions a year. So, there's going to be issues and mistakes. But one that comes to mind was somebody who he approached the department about his pension, believing he was entitled to a contributory old age pension when he was 66. Whatever interaction happened at that stage, he came away from the department believing that he wasn't entitled. And then he had some discussion with somebody when he was 70 and found that, in fact, he was entitled. So he went back, he made the application, and the department this time said, yes, you are entitled to the pension, but they were only going to backdate it for 6 months. And we intervened and said, no, we didn't think that was reasonable, because if he hadn't approached the department at all, that would be different. But he had sought advice and information from the department. So in that case, I think it was in the region of 40,000 that man got backdated, because he got backdated from the age of 70 to the age of 66 when he should have got the pension. Similarly, I mentioned at the outset that we deal with nursing homes, and we came across a situation. Somebody complained to us that a gentleman was discharged, rather is the word I'm looking for, from hospital into a nursing home. Both the family and himself thought this was a temporary measure. It turned out to be a long-term measure, but nobody discussed the cost. They believed it was being paid by the state. After a number of months, they received a bill for €32,000, which nobody was expecting and they didn't have. Again, they approached the nursing home. The nursing home said it's due. They came to us, and when we engaged and we pointed out to the nursing home that, when they weren't told in advance and nobody explained this to them, it wasn't reasonable to keep seeking this money, so the nursing home wrote that money off. So you can see there's a very broad range of areas that we cover.
Now, another thing comes to mind, Ger, and Lord help us, I'd say your inbox is absolutely bursting at the seams, but we'll say, for argument's sake, the likes of that case that you highlighted there with that poor lady out in St. Vincent's Hospital, where you pointed out quite logically, for the love of God, lads, we live in a technological age. You're all under the one roof. Send it electronically from one consultant to another, problem solved. Do you go back maybe 6-12 months' time and have a look to make sure that they're implementing the recommendations you made, or do you have that power?
We generally do. And especially where we do what we call these own initiative investigations, we get maybe, for example, the one I mentioned with the HSE and the treatment abroad, which the report itself, if anybody would like to go on our website and look at it, is called In Sickness and in Debt. And that was published about 18 months ago. And I'm very pleased to say that we recently got an update, or just at the end of last year, got the update from the HSE to say that all of all the recommendations have been fully implemented. But another way, of course, we're happy to accept that on face value, but another way we can measure that is the number of complaints we continue to receive. And in that case, we now receive no complaints about that particular scheme, which is a real success. Not because we're not getting complaints, but because we believe the scheme is being properly run and it has a proper appeal system in place now to deal with where things go wrong. But yes, we do. In fact, we do monitor the outcome of these things.
Jerry, you're going to love me for this question. You really are. If you hear a click phone, it'll be Ger hanging up on the other end. People listening to us this morning who have genuine complaints with any government, any taxpayer-funded organisation they're dealing with, that's the best way, I think, of wrapping this up, Ger. How do they get in touch with you?
Well, there's a number of ways they can get in touch with us. For most people, the easiest way is our website, ombudsman.ie, and they'll find an actual form there to help them to make a complaint. If they want to, they can write to us at 6 Earlsford Terrace. And I'm also going to give a phone number. And you talked earlier about communication. one of the things we come across, and indeed I've come across it personally, is when you go onto a website and you can't find a telephone number, you can't contact people. This is often a problem. So we're very happy to receive calls from people if they want to talk to us and even figure out whether it is that they can actually have a complaint. So the address is 6 Earls for Terrace, Dublin 2, and the phone number is Dublin number 01 639 5600, 639 5600. But for most people, we find ombudsman.ie is the best way. But equally, we want to be as accessible as we possibly can to people.
And just on that, what hours is that phone manned on?
That's 9 to 5 on 01 639 5600.
And that is very important, because there are people listening this morning, Ger, who, how will I put this diplomatically, would be of an age where that's the only way that they can contact people as well. They're not technologically savvy. And,
absolutely.
You know, and those people have to be catered for as well, and maybe to a greater extent than different generations. Ger,
that's true, and indeed, the complaint sometimes arises because they can't actually contact the body concerned, you know.
And that is extremely frustrating, and that is something I guarantee you everybody listening to us this morning will have encountered that at some stage or another. Ger, one final question before we go. How long are you in the job?
I'm just 3 years in the job.
Yeah, I know you were appointed by President Higgins, but
that's right.
In the 3 years that you're there, have you seen your workload increasing?
Yes, our workload is increasing. The number of complaints is increasing. Now, that may be due to two things. One is we're doing quite an amount of this kind of work, talking to people like yourself, who always has an impact, and I'd be surprised if we don't get a bit of a response after talking to you today. So the outreach that we're doing is probably increasing the number of complaints. But also, I suppose, there's far more interaction. I mean, people with a higher population, there are more public services. I'd like to think it's not because things are getting worse, because I think as we resolve one problem, something else, a new scheme arises or something new happens. But very definitely, the graph is going upwards each year in terms of the number of complaints we receive.
Ger Deering, Ombudsman for the Public Services, I suppose, or maybe the more common sense way of putting it would be anybody which is funded by taxpayers' money. Ger, thank you so much for joining me this morning. I was so looking forward. I don't think I worked as hard and chased as hard to get an interview as this one, because I find it fascinating and I find the role brilliant, because in fairness, you are negotiating and navigating absolute minefields for people who would not get a reckoning otherwise. So for that, I thank you. And for joining me this morning, I thank you as well. Do not worry, my friends, if you didn't get the contact details when Ger was giving them out there, because our chat will be available later on this afternoon on our listening in services, so you can go back there and get those details again. Ger Deering, Ombudsman, thank you so much for joining me this morning. I really enjoyed it, Ger. And if it's all right with you, maybe in 6 or 7 months we'll come back to you. We'll have another chat about how things are progressing. Thanks very much, Donie. We're delighted to talk to you again. Take care now. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thank you. What a fascinating man. What a fascinating job he has. And, you know, it really is... Look, the work they do is fabulous because, as he said there, prior to their inception, where did you go and what did you do to get to resolve an issue?
Near FM.